Community as method. This is really the essence of therapeutic communities. But even for sites that are not really doing a classic therapeutic community, understanding the basics of how community works, one of the underlying concepts that have been proven for 60 years now, that are valuable in just about any therapeutic setting. So we know that George DeLeon has kind of been the guru of therapeutic communities. He's been involved for really pretty much since the beginning. And he wrote a book called Therapeutic Community Theory, Model, and Method, which is an academic book. I mean, he really wanted to take the therapeutic community and describe it in a way that an academic audience could understand. We took that book and George and did a 3-hour documentary, which is available on the Amity YouTube channel, which is the book is something that is very valuable to read, but it's kind of tough going too. The idea of the video series was to make it a little easier and a little bit more accessible for folks. And what we're doing in this particular video is making it even just really talking about the concepts and very much in terms of what we're doing at Amity and how it applies. So community as method is essentially what George sort of synthesized out of all of the different ways of looking at therapeutic communities. It really says that the therapeutic community is an intentional community. Now, communities can form a lot of different ways. Communities can form traditionally, can form around language, they can form around a location. But an intentional community is a community that's not, people are not related by race or ethnicity. They're really, it comes together with the intent of doing something. And in this case, the intent is for healing and for providing a safe environment for people to grow and to change. Obviously, the therapeutic community started as a reaction, at least in the United States, to the heroin crisis back in the 60s. But we're really using it to very purposefully use community to facilitate social and psychological change in individuals, and actually in the entire community itself. So if you're talking about an intentional community being the healer and being the method, essentially, if the community really doesn't form, it doesn't work. So the faculty or the staff are really the first circle of community. You know, it's in a way kind of like a university. You have a faculty, and then you have students or, residents who come in for an experience, and then they go on out. So the bones of the community is always the faculty. So that really puts a burden on us to make sure that the faculty do form community. Rather than acting as individual counselors in a clinic who might have lunch together, but other than that, really don't really have much of a relationship with each other. So the therapeutic community, right at the very beginning, is profoundly different than a counseling approach. Counseling approach is, I'm knowledgeable, I've gone academic training, I've had mentors who have guided me into skill in my practice, and my job, you come in, is to diagnose you. What is your problem? To listen to you, hear what your problems are, and come up with an appropriate diagnosis and then some steps, which might be, if you're a psychopharmacologist, it may be, giving you some kind of a drug or something for your mental health disorder. It may be, if you're more psychological and behavioral, it may be a behavioral intervention. I want you to do this to correct these problems that you're having in your relationship, your job, whatever. In the therapeutic community, rather than having this individual relationship with a counselor, the job of the faculty is to use the community to essentially create situations in which you interact, and in those interactions you are learning skills and changing. Okay? Whole different deal. So somebody, I always say to people, there's a crisis, and one approach to somebody does something stupid or ridiculous, which probably happens every day. One approach is the direct approach. I am going to intervene, and I'm going to discipline you, or I'm going to make you do something. I'm going to remove you from the community for a while because you're acting out, or whatever. In the therapeutic community, the faculty member says, okay, how can we use the community to create a solution to this particular problem so that everybody learns? Okay, so you get 3 or 4 of the person's peers together, and you have a small encounter group or circle with that person, in which those peers, which he or she is living with, feed back in terms of how that misbehavior is affecting them, and they may talk about how important that person is to them and why this is kind of a rupture in the relationships. But again, everybody's learning. That person is learning from their peers that their behavior really is affecting them. And the peers are learning also, because who learns the most in any situation? The teacher, okay? So that's what we call it, a teaching and learning community, because we really want to get everybody in that community teaching and learning simultaneously. There was back in the very early days when people were trying to find descriptions of Synanon, which was the first American therapeutic community, one of the descriptions was the communiversity, which I thought was a lovely term, which is, it's a learning situation in which all the teachers are learners and all the learners are teachers. And that simultaneously teaching and learning creates this great dynamic that helps people really change, much more than they would in a didactic situation. Particularly because, what does the therapeutic community excel at? It excels at working with people that other approaches generally aren't very successful. So the skilled TC practitioner, faculty member, is in a lot of ways more of a coach than a player, because you're constantly setting up situations for learning and growth and insights to take place in the community, rather than being the source of those yourself. And we've found over the years, people who are traditionally trained really wrestle with this. Their identity is how good they are at individually dealing with a person who has problems. And to step back and to begin to be more of an orchestra conductor, where you are using the entire community to facilitate change, they feel like, well, that isn't what I was trained to do, or I don't feel successful unless I'm actually the agent of change. Rather than being the person who, in some ways, we would call it creating the conditions for the happy accident, okay, or the happy learning experience. So it's a different approach, and fundamentally, right at the beginning, it's important to understand that, because if you don't understand that, nothing else really makes sense. So George laid out in his book and his studies over many decades several what he considers to be essential elements of a therapeutic community. And again, let me remind you, if you don't have a traditional therapeutic community, which is impossible in some situations, all of these elements are still very, very useful. They can be incorporated into whatever you're doing. Participant roles, membership feedback, role models, collective formats to guide individual change, shared norms and values, structure and systems, open communication, and relationships. Those are those 8 elements. We're going to talk about each one of them briefly. Participant roles. So what we really want in our teaching and therapeutic communities is we want people engaged. We want them not to be spectators. And unlike a clinic where you come in and somebody feeds you the things you need to do. They tell you, okay, I've listened to your problem, and this is what you need to do, and you come back and report to me, and let's see how you did with that. This is much more. We want people to be coming up with a lot of their own solutions, to be really engaged with the community, participating in the community. And so, people will have in the community, they will have jobs. They'll have some job functions. Okay, your job is to sweep the hall, or your job is to go and help out in the kitchen or the dining room, or we've got a lot of chip paint. We're going to put together a little paint crew and do things like that, or you're going to help because you've been around a little longer. You're going to help teach some of the classes, or so forth and so on. You're going to copy things that we need to have copied. We have there's lots of little jobs that people can do and should do, so they feel like they're making a contribution to the community. And that's really, really important. The need to be needed and to be valued is critical. And so many of our folks don't feel needed. They really feel in their lives that they've never been needed or valued. And so it's very important as we engage them. And you come in and immediately we've got something for you to do. Somebody comes in and, well, I've only been here a week. Well, you've been here a week longer than the person who's just came in yesterday, so you can teach them what the first week is like. Mm-hmm. So constantly, I remember when I went to Ron Williams' Staying Out back in the 80s. We went back and visited with Ron, who was running this seminal therapeutic community program called Staying Out in the New York prisons. And he had the job functions up on the board. One guy's job was to change the television channel, which can actually be quite a bone of contention. And I thought, okay, we got it down to the granular level here. So, but then there's roles, there's jobs, which you're helping the community organize it, whether it's sweeping the floor or making sure the bathroom has toilet paper or whatever it is. But there's roles. There's the role of being a peer, of course. There's the role of being a friend. There's the role of being an older brother. There's the role of being the younger brother. There's the role of being a surrogate family member, We play all these different roles for each other in community. The word therapeutic community came out of a book by Jake Moreno, who developed psychodrama. And the book was called Who Shall Survive? And in it he talked about therapeutic communities, not having anything to do with addiction. But in community, we all play these helpful roles for each other, you know, that help us heal and help us grow and change. So role play really fosters understanding, because as I'm playing a helping role for you, I'm your brother, or I'm your father, or I'm your, best friend, or whatever, and playing this role for you, what's happening for me? Empathy. I'm beginning to understand what it's like in terms, I can role reverse with you because I'm really playing that role, okay? And role reversing is so critically important for the development of empathy, So we begin to really understand how others feel, and in that process we begin to understand our own emotions, It's so valuable. Next essential concept was membership feedback. So in community, the primary source of instruction and the primary source of support is really feedback from other members of the community. It's not so much I've diagnosed you because I'm so wise and I have so many plaques on my wall showing how incredibly brilliant and skilled I am. You're getting an awful lot of feedback from your peers, who some of them have very similar experiences to you. Some of them have different experiences from you and have a different perspective. And so everybody is part of this engagement in the community. Everybody's expected to provide honest feedback to other members of the community. And that's really the encounter group or the circle or whatever we call it, that circular format where people are encouraged to speak honestly to each other about their observations. That's a critical part of the community healing process and community as method. We understand that many of people who come in to our communities are kind of hard-headed. I mean, they don't listen to feedback really, really well. And so having this sort of concentrated forum for feedback is really, really helpful. And, there's an old joke. If everybody calls you a pony, often enough, it may be time to check out saddles. But, in fact, when you hear the same thing over and over again from many different people who like you, have your best interests at heart, then you begin to think, well, I'm going to have to look at that issue, because it's consistent, it's from peers, it's from people who've had experiences like yours, but maybe a little further up the road than you are, and it makes it a lot easier to hear and then to act on the advice and the feedback that you're getting. So probably the next concept is really membership as role models. So what do we ask people to do as being part of the community? We ask them to role model for others. So we have a whole community in which the expectation is I am modeling behavior for you that if you adopted it, your life would be better. Okay, your relationships would be better. Now, of course, people do this some of the time, not all the time. But the expectation is that you are responsible for honest feedback for the other members in the community. And you are responsible, we use the term, you are your brother's keeper or you are your sister's keeper. We set up things like you are the big brother for somebody coming in, so you're responsible for them in terms of being oriented to the community. We use a lot of these methods to emphasize that this being a role model, being somebody who's reliable, who gives good advice, who cares about the other person, is an important part of being in this community. It's your responsibility. Also, the faculty, the staff, have to take this on too. Okay, you have to act and live in a way that you are a role model. This isn't one of these things. Being a part of a community, an intentional community, is different than working at the library. I mean, when you leave work at the library, who cares what you do, as long as you don't, commit a crime or something. But for us, we want people to live in a manner that is consistent with what they're teaching. You can't go out and use cocaine on Saturday night and come in Monday morning and teach sobriety. That's not going to work, because our folks, they may have had a lot of problems. They may have been terrible in terms academically. They may have failed at many of their jobs, but they have a very good nose for hypocrisy, a very good nose for it. And they can smell it a mile off. And faculty who are living not consistent with what they're teaching, that comes across very quickly, and they are dismissed, and they're completely ineffective. So our fourth concept is collective formats for guiding individual change. Unlike the didactic approach, where people are primarily involved in a two-person relationship, the therapist and the patient, or the person who's being counseled. Almost everything we do in the therapeutic community, we do have one-on-ones, we do have individual conversations that are therapeutic in nature, but most of what's happening is happening in groups, in meetings, in seminars, and in job functions, in recreational activities. So this is these processes are all community kinds of activities. As George says, the learning and healing experiences necessary for recovery unfold in a social context. Nice way of saying it. So you're mostly engaging with peers, and again, your counselor or your faculty member is really setting the stage, is guiding and helping, but is not the direct, in most cases. Now, do faculty, yes, intervene in situations with people very directly? Yes. But primarily, the focus is using the community to do this. Our next concept is shared norms and values. So when I go into a situation, and I've been in a few, I remember walking to somebody who says, there's 225 rules on the wall. To me, this is not going to work, okay? Because what you really need is very few rules. Very few rules. The few rules that really protect the community and protect individuals within the community. And typically those rules are like, you can't use drugs or other modifiers here. And of course, because there's so many of our folks that have, coexisting mental health disorders, the caveat there is, of course, you can use prescribed medication that is used to ameliorate a mental health problem. We do also take people into our communities now that may be on methadone or Suboxone or something like that, and hopefully we can wean them off of that while they're in community. So we've made some changes from the traditional absolutely no drugs, and you couldn't even get an aspirin back in the 60s, to be a much more overall health conscious kind of approach. But no illicit drugs or drinking or whatever, no violence or threats of violence, because once you have threats of violence or actual violence, then you've lost the safety, the psychological safety that's really necessary for people to allow themselves to be vulnerable so they can change. You're not going to open yourself up, unzip, and tell your deepest, darkest secrets if you're afraid of being ridiculed, shunned, or attacked. Okay, so that's really, those kind of rules are really, really basic, and can result in expulsion, and people won't pay attention to those. I mean, it's one thing to make a mistake, it's another thing to repeatedly make mistakes. You may have to expel people from, you may say that this isn't going to work because you're threatening the very existence of this sanctuary that we need so that other people can change. But a lot of what is in the therapeutic community are what we'd call norms. In other words, the norm of being thoughtful and generous toward other people, of giving them honest feedback and not playing with them, psychologically, of really expressing concern and care toward newer people in the community, and feeling responsible to be a role model in terms of your behavior. These are all norms. They're not rules on the wall. They're things that you are taught by your peers, of course led by the faculty and their role modeling. Okay? If you have a faculty member who is nasty and unpleasant and really uncaring, that's role modeling the wrong kind of behavior, and other people will sort of pick up on that. So that again, the faculty are such important for establishing the norms in the community and role modeling those norms themselves, amongst themselves. If the students see the faculty are not getting along with each other, who are fighting and are very divisive, well, then they know kind of, oh, yeah, that's what they say, but this is what they really do. Again, coming back to that, staff are the first circle of community. The sixth element we're talking about is structure and systems. Now, it really depends. When we have a lot of different varieties of community. When we're in a prison setting, some of the things that happen in a residential setting can't happen. I mean, it's just, the way it's set up. But, in a lot of our communities, people, of course, there's a structure. Sometimes there's a structure board that has all the different tasks on it. Sometimes it's done more informally, but people have kind of an organizational structure. So people report to certain things, and maybe working in the kitchen or dining room, or raking the leaves or mowing the lawn, or whatever needs to be done in that community. When we get into prisons, in many cases, we don't have any choices. The work is assigned by the institution. Ideally, in an institution, if our community participants can work together, then we really get a lot more value out of that, because then they bring back some of those work experiences and difficulties they're having, and that feeds right into groups and meetings and seminars, and enhances the learning. It also is difficult in correctional institutions, because there's these rules like no inmate can supervise another inmate or be the boss of another inmate. But there's ways of kind of getting around that as well, where people can work together and shift the leadership around and so forth and so on. But the structure and systems of the community are really important, just like they are in any organization, to provide clarity, to provide stability and consistent expectations for people. And those all feed into the therapeutic aspects of community as well. And I've got a slide here of the circle and triangle, and another one that really shows just a picture of a structure board in a TC I was in, and I don't remember where this one was, but it's pretty typical. Our seventh concept is open communication. We expect people and we ask people to be relentlessly honest. And the longer they're in community, the more honest they're expected to be. We don't expect day one people to come in and talk about things that they have never talked about. But over time, we're role modeling this. Faculty are role modeling it. The students who've been there for a while are role modeling it. And the power of personal honesty is such a critical element in the growth and change that happens to people in community. There's really no substitute for that. I've seen some of the most incredible things. When we opened our prison project in Donovan back in the 90s, some of the lifers, tough guys, who had been charged with murder, got into groups and talked about being molested. Wow. I mean, it just blew people away, because that's something that you never, ever talk about. And what it did is everybody who had that kind of experience then felt safe to begin to wrestle with those particular demons and talk about them. And there was such an enormous sense of sanctuary. Here we are in this 5,000 person prison on a yard with 1,000 people. All of them, on the yard we were on, most of them who had committed crimes of violence. And in that setting, in the trailers that we had, we were as safe as if we were in a Zen monastery. I mean, there was just this incredible, and how did that safety occurred by, not by the faculty, but by the students being inspired by the faculty and coming forth and saying, okay, let's just do it. Let's just go for it and say it and create this safe environment. And it was amazing. It was tremendously powerful. Well, so if it can happen in a medium security prison with violent offenders, well, it can kind of happen any place. It's just a matter of choice. Do we want to allow it to happen? Because it kind of wants to happen. People want to unburden themselves. They're scared. They're frightened of admitting it. They're frightened of being shamed or shunned or laughed at or whatever. But they kind of want to unburden themselves from these traumatic experiences that they've had and the traumatic experiences they've committed. You have to realize that a person who has been violent has not only traumatized others, but has traumatized themselves in the process, and have actually, in many cases, are victims of earlier trauma. So, critically important is that we create a sanctuary setting and that our circles must really be non-disclosure outside of the circle. So what you hear in the circle stays there. The person who's disclosed something, they can disclose it anywhere, but the people who have heard it must hold the sanctuary of the circle. And obviously in a prison, I mean, one of the reasons this worked is that people did not go out in the yard with other inmates who were not involved in the community and take other people's secrets and disclosures and put them out there, which would have destroyed the whole thing. But they really held that sanctuary. While there are rules about overfamiliarity, and there should be, between inmates and faculty, there are ways that faculty can be honest about their stories and their experiences without compromising overfamiliarity rules, so that people know that the faculty members are genuine and authentic. Okay? And that doesn't mean you bring your present circumstances into for inmates to nibble on, but it's certainly valuable. We had a lot. Our first cohort of faculty at the Donovan Project were all people who were ex-offenders, all who had criminal histories, and they spoke. Look, I know how you feel. Okay, been there, done that, and that was part of their credibility. Okay, was the fact that they were genuine and they were authentic. without being overfamiliar. Our final concept is relationships. And this is again one that people are trained many times academically. You really can't have a personal relationship with somebody that you're counseling or treating or whatever word you want to use. And why do we call it amity? Friendship. I mean, it's because friendship is so important. Learning how to make friends, learning what friendship really is, that friendship is not somebody who co-signs your insanity. Friendship is someone who will be there with you for thick and thin, but will also pull you up and tell you when you're acting like an idiot, and call you on your lies, call you on your rationalizations. Those are the kind of friendships we really need. We also need those same folks to affirm us when we're doing well and to support us when we're feeling down. But I always tell people, the faculty, friendship includes you. For a lot of these folks coming in, to feel that you actually are a friend, not just a staff member, but you're a friend of their best behaviors and of their better selves, is really critical for them, as well as, of course, making friendships in the community. But the friendship from a mature person who really understands you is very frequently the catalyst for making other friends and for trusting other people in the community. So we want to emphasize this is not over familiarity. This is not giving an inmate your phone number and your address and in any way creating the expectation of some kind of a relationship that is other than the therapeutic relationship. And people get confused about that. But, there is a line there, and we don't want people to cross that line. But that does not mean you cannot be a friend and not act in a friendly way. In fact, a lot of the activities we encourage, the membership activities, which we've talked about in other settings, are designed so that you can take off of your counseling hat and just be a human being with one of the students or a number of the students. I always talk, being the bowling coach at Circle Tree Ranch for 2 or 3 years, I enjoyed it a great deal. They had no idea who the hell I was, other than the fact that I would arrange this every week. And we had a lot of fun together. I got to know them in a very different way than I would have otherwise. And that kind of genuine affection for the people that you are in a therapeutic relationship with is very good for them. It's good for you too. So those are really, George does this beautifully in his book. I think he did a great job in the video that we made. But this is a little bit more putting it kind of in amity language, which I think may help some of you get these concepts in perhaps a different way than you would just reading about them.